Marine versus Royal Guard. Who wins? The real story behind the viral video. Jake Carter, a 32-year-old U.S. Marine, stumbled through the crowd outside Buckingham Palace, the air thick with tourists snapping photos and recording videos of one of the most iconic landmarks in the world. Jake's every step was soaked in arrogance and alcohol. His Navy service coat, decorated with patches symbolizing years of combat experience, hung loosely on his broad shoulders. It was clear to anyone who looked at him that he was a man used to getting attention. His unbuttoned jacket and the swagger in his stride screamed one thing: confidence, or rather, cocky entitlement. The faint scent of alcohol clung to him, a reminder of the drinks he had started with that morning, and the ones he never stopped having. The tourists around him seemed unaware of the storm brewing in Jake's mind. He had been drinking since the start of the day, enjoying every bit of the buzz it gave him. As the crowd moved in waves, he could hear the faint chatter and laughter in the air, but it didn't matter. He was the center of his own universe. A deep laugh escaped him as he spoke to a group of American tourists, already recording. "Hey, guys, get your phones ready. This is gonna be a show," Jake smirked, winking at them. His voice was loud enough to draw attention, but no one was really surprised. When Jake Carter was around, everyone knew something was coming, something big, something for the gram. He wasn't just a tourist here to admire British history. No, Jake was here for one reason: to make his own history. He walked toward the Royal Guard, who stood still as a statue, his red tunic as pristine as the guard's stoic discipline. Jake's phone was already out, recording the scene. He stood tall in front of the unmoving soldier, feeling the crowd shift around him, eyes beginning to lock onto him. The guards had always been a tourist attraction, but Jake didn't see them as symbols of tradition or authority. To him, they were just another target for his unrelenting need to push boundaries. The guard didn't react, didn't even blink, which, to Jake, was all the more frustrating. The more unmoving the guard remained, the more Jake felt his confidence swell. Without hesitation, Jake moved closer, practically nose to nose with the soldier, his voice dripping with mockery. "Are you even alive in there?" he muttered, waving his hand sharply in front of the soldier's face. No reaction. Jake's grin grew wider, and he stepped back, already planning his next move, confident that he was about to turn this moment into his next viral sensation. Jake stood in front of the Royal Guard, his smirk widening as he stared at the soldier's stone-faced expression. The crowd had started to take notice, their whispers growing louder, but Jake didn't care. This was his show, and he was the star. The guard remained motionless, not even flinching as Jake waved his hand aggressively in front of his face, but that just made him more determined. He was used to provoking people, to being the center of attention, and this was no different. But the more the guard stood still, the more Jake's frustration bubbled up. With a huff, Jake took a step closer, his face inches away from the soldiers. His eyes locked onto the guard's cold, unwavering gaze, searching for the smallest hint of emotion. But there was nothing, just the unshakable discipline that Jake couldn't stand. His lips curled into a mocking grin. "Seriously, dude, are you a puppet or a human?" he muttered, feeling his pulse quicken with the rush of power. Jake had seen the videos, people trying to get the Royal Guards to react, to break their perfect composure. But he wasn't interested in a simple reaction. He wanted more. He wanted to be the one who made history. He snapped his fingers in front of the guard's face. Still, nothing. The crowd around them was on edge now, cameras ready, phones held high, sensing that something was about to happen. Jake didn't care if the crowd was recording. In fact, he wanted them to. With a laugh, he took it one step further. He shoved the guard's shoulder. Hard. The impact was louder than expected, the sound of the shove echoing off the stone pavement. The crowd gasped, and a few people instinctively stepped back, sensing this was more than just a harmless joke. But Jake was too drunk and too full of himself to back down now. He stood over the guard, waiting for him to react, for the soldier to break his stoic facade. But nothing happened. Jake's cocky smile faltered for a moment as a realization dawned on him. This was no ordinary soldier. This guard wasn't like the others who might yell or shout back. This man was trained, disciplined, and he wasn't about to give Jake the satisfaction he was craving. Jake narrowed his eyes, his smirk turning into something darker. He had pushed the soldier this far, and now he wasn't going to stop. He leaned in closer, his voice dripping with mockery. "You think you're better than me?" he taunted. But the guard remained still, and that was when Jake made the worst mistake of his life. Jake's laughter rang out as he stood over the fallen royal guard, still giddy with the rush of what he had just done. He had shoved the soldier, and with one swift movement, he had thrown him down onto the ground. The crowd froze in shock, and Jake, thinking he had won, soaked in the moment. His chest swelled with pride as he stood over the soldier's fallen body. This was his victory. He'd made the stiff royal guard break. The crowd, once in awe, was now silent, the cameras clicking furiously as people tried to capture the unbelievable scene. But as the seconds ticked by, Jake felt the atmosphere shift. The excitement of his victory began to feel strange, almost hollow. The guard hadn't made a sound when he hit the ground, but Jake could sense something was wrong. The crowd, who had been filming his every move, was no longer laughing. Their expressions had changed. They weren't watching him with admiration anymore. The whispers grew louder, and the air felt thick with something more serious than mockery. A cold chill ran down Jake's spine, but it was too late to back off now. His drunken ego wouldn't allow it. He kicked the fallen guard's ribs again, the force of his boot against the soldier's tunic echoing across the square. The crowd gasped, some stepped back, their faces filled with shock. But Jake didn't care. This was just a joke to him. He leaned down, grabbed the soldier's uniform, and yanked him back up, taunting him. "Where's your British pride now?" he jeered, feeling more and more invincible with every word. But before Jake could get another word in, everything changed. The guard, who had been motionless, suddenly moved. He didn't say a word, didn't flinch, didn't even seem angry. It was something much worse. His movements were calculated, swift, and precise. The silence that hung in the air was so intense, it felt like a thunderstorm was building. Jake's smirk faded as the guard's eyes locked onto him. The unease Jake had been trying to ignore grew into pure, gut-wrenching fear. Before he could react, the guard moved with lightning speed. Jake didn't even see it coming. The first strike hit him in the chest like a punch from a heavyweight boxer, knocking the wind out of him. The pain was immediate, sharp, and all-encompassing. His vision blurred, and he stumbled backward, barely able to breathe. He gasped, his body no longer in control as the guard's strikes landed with terrifying precision. This wasn't a street fight, it was punishment, and Jake was the one who had crossed the line. The crowd didn't laugh anymore. They didn't cheer. They watched, stunned, as Jake's bravado melted away, leaving him nothing but a man who had miscalculated his place in the world. Jake's head spun as he struggled to regain his footing. The pain in his chest and ribs was unbearable, but it wasn't just the physical pain that rattled him. It was the overwhelming realization that he had crossed a line he could never undo. The Royal Guard hadn't just struck back, he had shown Jake the true cost of disrespect. With each precise hit, Jake's arrogance and bravado crumbled, replaced by fear and confusion. He stumbled back, hands raised, his voice trembling. "Come on, it was just a joke, man." But the guard didn't respond. He didn't need to. His eyes, cold and unblinking, were all the answer Jake needed. He had underestimated the soldier's discipline, his resolve, and now it was too late. Jake wanted to move, wanted to fight back, but his body refused to cooperate. The pounding in his chest wasn't just from the blows. It was the realization that he was out of his depth. The crowd, once caught up in Jake's act, had fallen silent. Phones, which had once been capturing every moment of his show, were now still. No one was laughing anymore. No one was cheering. The tourists who had been watching him were now stepping back, some even turning their faces away. There was no sympathy left for him, only a silent agreement that he deserved what was coming. Then, as if the tension in the air hadn't been thick enough, the sound of boots echoed through the square. It wasn't just a guard anymore. Two more soldiers, tall and imposing, emerged from behind the gates, their steps synchronized, their movements flawless. The crowd instinctively parted, clearing a path for the men who moved with unyielding precision. Jake felt the cold sweat on his back as the realization hit him like a ton of bricks. This wasn't over. His smirk faded into a nervous laugh. "Wait, come on, guys, it's just a misunderstanding." But no one was listening. Not the crowd, not the soldiers, not the two new guards who were now standing before him with unwavering calm. The man who had laughed, who had thought he was invincible, was now being held in the grip of his own recklessness. The officers moved forward slowly, no rush, no anger, just a cold, calculated certainty in their movements. Jake's hands were seized, and he was spun around. His phone hit the ground, the screen cracking in the process, but he barely noticed. "You are under arrest for assaulting a member of the Royal Guard," one of the officers said, his voice void of emotion. Jake's world fell apart in an instant. The crowd, the cameras, the moment of glory he had sought, everything was gone. And what was left was the cold, harsh reality that there were consequences even for someone who thought they were untouchable. Jake felt his legs buckle beneath him as the officer pulled his arms behind his back, snapping the cuffs in place. The weight of the metal seemed to crush him, dragging him into a reality he hadn't prepared for. The crowd, once his audience, now watched with a mix of shock and quiet satisfaction. The smirk he had worn only moments ago was gone, replaced by a grimace of disbelief. His chest heaved, but not from exertion. His lungs were still fighting to catch air from the brutal blows he had taken. The worst part, though, wasn't the pain or the fact that he was on his knees in front of everyone. It was the sinking feeling that his reputation, his pride, was shattered beyond repair. As the officers led him away, he tried to speak, to make them see that this was all a misunderstanding, that it was just some drunken stunt. You don't understand. I'm an American. This isn't how it's supposed to go. His words were weak, desperate. But they didn't answer him. They didn't have to. They knew. He was no longer in control. He was just another man caught in the consequences of his own foolishness. The crowd had been filming every second of his humiliation. Phones were still raised, capturing his downfall from every angle. The footage was already spreading like wildfire, and Jake could feel the weight of it crushing him. This was no longer about a viral video. This was about the fact that he had made a serious mistake, one he couldn't undo. When they threw him into the back of the police car, Jake didn't fight back. He slumped against the seat, his mind spinning with the gravity of the situation. He thought back to the guards, standing unshaken, unmoved. They didn't care who he was or what he had done. To them, he was nothing. His bravado, his ego, all of it had crumbled in an instant. The next morning, the world had already moved on, but for Jake, it was just the beginning of his downfall. News headlines flashed across his phone. Drunk tourist attacks royal guard, gets justice. People were laughing, sharing, mocking him online. He tried to ignore it, tried to block out the sound of his own disgrace, but the more he looked, the more he realized there was no coming back. He was no longer the man he thought he was. The royal guard had stood tall, unmoving, and in the end, it wasn't them who had broken, it was Jake. What do you think about this dramatic moment? Was Jake's punishment too harsh, or did he get exactly what he deserved? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. We'd love to hear your opinions.